WABC New York.
WABC, Arbitron rated #1 AM radio station in New York City. And now, Black by Popular Demand. Dr. Walter Williams sitting in for Rush Limbaugh on the EIB network.
This is Professor Walter Williams, and he's back. Professor of Economics at George Mason University, Professor of Limited Government and the American Way and Rule of Law and all those other good things. We have a great show today, and this has, by the way, been a fun day for me, a fun week for me, and actually it's my last day. Rush will be back in the Attila the Hun chair on Monday, same time, same place. And now, really, this has really been a great week for me, and it could not have been done without the able assistance of James and Mike at the controls. And we have a great show in store for you today. In the second hour, we're going to have David Bowes. He's the vice president of the Washington-based Cato Institute to talk about the war on drugs and various proposals therein. And then, in the third hour, I'm not only going to give this beautiful pearl of wisdom that's comes out every week across the nation in my syndicated column, syndicated by creators in Los Angeles, but I have a gift for white liberals. I'm going to try to formally grant them. I've taken a lot of time this week to grant them forgiveness for their grievances against my people and those of their forebears. And since this is my last day in the Attila the Hun chair, I've spun out all kinds of tidbits that I've been gathering and having my secretary assistant, the wonderful Kathy in Virginia, collect and store for me. And since I found out I would be sitting in Rush's chair. But first, a couple of news updates. And turning to the review and outlook of the Wall Street Journal, there's a very interesting article. It was written by Paul A. Jago. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And it's called John and Bill, Anita and Jennifer, Sex and Standards. And he starts off by a quote from Sam Nunn attacking John Tower. You remember when John Tower, I believe he was going through the appointment process or the confirmation process to become the Secretary of Defense. And he said, and here's what Nunn said, the committee found examples of indiscreet conduct towards women which call into question his judgment and his ability to set an appropriate example. Now, you wonder whether Sam Nunn is saying this about his buddy in the White House. And then you know that there are many news people are saying, well, we shouldn't look at Clinton, dig up his life and his affairs and things like that. But it turned out to be front page news in a time when Kitty Kelly made insinuations about Nancy Reagan and Frank Sinatra on page 1 of that fine newspaper. And then also the news media says that the troopers have suspect motives because they might make money out of coming forth with the Clinton story. Well, did you hear anybody say that about Anita Hill? And Anita Hill is making big bucks. Out on the lecture tour, I think it's at least $10,000 a lecture. And then she's recently signed contracts to write 2 books. And then the president's defenders, Paul Jago goes down and says that the president's defenders don't say anything about the abuse of police officers to kind of carry Clinton around and the use of state resources for their personal use, But the Democrats are after Kay Bailey Hutchison of Texas. They're seeking an indictment for her use of state resources for personal use, alleged use of state resources for her personal use. Well, so much for double standards in the media. New York Times, there is a possibility that New York City may be saved. It turns out that New York City led the nation in condom distribution in schools. And it turns out that the state appellate court ruled that such a program required parental consent. See, the people in New York in the schools, they were giving out condoms without parental consent. And so the court now says, well, look, we're going to require you to get parental consent. And so what the school board's going to start doing, they're going to start, quote unquote, educating parents so that parents will give their consent for the kids to have condoms. I'll tell you one thing. If I had a son and anybody gave him a condom, I would go up to the school and try to adjust that guy's attitude. And why? It's because he's usurping parental authority. That is, I, as a father, that is parents, mothers, dads, or if it's just one mother, they should make the decision whether a kid gets a condom. Now let's this is not a news bit, but it's kind of an educational bit. And it has to do with sex discrimination. The feminist rhetoric is that since the median income, now median means half above and half below of a particular level, of equally productive women is only 61% of that of males, they say that there's pay discrimination that requires a government solution. That is, these chauvinists are discriminating against equally productive women. Well, there's a real question about whether these women being compared to men are as equally productive as men. And let me give you some examples. It turns out that if you break out women in the labor force who have never been married, who are unmarried and have never been married, and let's say those who work continuously in the labor force from 18 to 35, their median income is slightly higher than males of the same description. And my colleague, Thomas Sowell, he did a study some years ago in a little book called Civil Rights, Rhetoric or Reality, and he shows that if you take female professors who have never been married and have the same quality degree, the same years of experience, the same number of publications of that a male professor who has never been married, their median income is $400 higher. Now, it turns out that the basic problem or the basic thing explaining the pay differences between men and women at the median is marriage. That is, marriage takes a toll on women. That is, for example, look, when I come home, I put my feet on the sofa and I tell my wife to bring my journals, bring my professional journals. Or I might call her up and tell her, well, look, I have a professional meeting to go to, blah, 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 blah. And so I'm there maintaining my human capital. But women, they're typically faced with the chore of raising kids and taking care of the household and other responsibilities that men, at least under the old-fashioned marriages, have chosen not to, they've taken responsibilities that men have chosen not to do. And so when a man gets married, he gets a helper. And when a woman gets married, she becomes a helpee. Now, very interestingly, men who have been never married, their median income is only 65% of married men. So could it be that companies are discriminating against unmarried men? Well, that's just nonsense. It turns out the reason why unmarried men don't make as much as married men, and Bo, you better listen to this, is because they don't have helpers. That is, a married man has a helper, and so he makes more money. As a matter of fact, another good reason that men should get married is that they live longer, there are fewer suicides, and they're healthier. So, when we look at statistics between men and women, we have to make sure, men and women's pay, we have to make sure we're comparing apples with apples. Well, that's a lot for you to think about, and I'll take your calls after these words. This is Walter Williams sitting in for Rush Limbaugh. Rush will be back Monday. Let me just, before we go to calls, before we go to phones, let me give you a few updates because you might not have kept up with them. Remember Love Canal, where all the environmentalists had us in a tizzy? Well, studies show now that there's no increased cancer or other health effects, and people are lining up to buy the homes that were abandoned. Times Beach, Missouri. Remember the dioxin scare that wiped off the map a whole city? Well, the EPAs now say, quote, an expensive mistake. Remember the Alar scare that was fed to CBS 60 Minutes by environmental groups? Well, that was found out to be a hoax. What about the asbestos scare? That is found out to be a hoax. Now, what about the hole in the ozone layer? Well, it turns out, according to several studies, that a 5% depletion of ozone would cause a 10% increase in ultraviolet radiation. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean, my friends? Well, that is equivalent to moving 60 miles closer to the equator, namely from Los Angeles to San Diego, because as you go further south, you get closer to the sun until you're at that's why the equator is so hot, because it's closer to the sun. And so, do you think we ought to make a law in our country denying people the right to move 60 miles south because of the effects of ultraviolet radiation? Well, this environmental stuff is really going to cost our country. It is really going to cost our country jobs and money. So you folks better wise up. Let's go take a few calls. How about Scott from San Diego? I just mentioned your wonderful city, Scott.
Yes, you sure did. It's an honor to talk to you. My wife thinks you're absolutely the guru of columnists.
Oh, well, thank you.
She waits for the Conservative Chronicle every week to speak to you, or listen to you, or read you, rather. The reason I'm calling is that yesterday you had on the program the gentleman from Dallas.
Oh, yes, Dr. John Goodman.
Yeah. And then you had a lady call in who spoke about her doctor making $400,000 to $600,000 a year.
Yes.
You indicated that either he's stealing from her or he's earning it.
Yes.
I am a young up-and-coming physician myself.
Are you? Are you an actual doctor?
No, sir. I'm working on it. I'm older than most, and I've gone back, and I made my choice.
Okay, well, you're not kidding us, are you?
No, no.
Okay.
No, I'm out here in San Diego visiting my mom, and
Okay.
I go to the University of Texas.
Okay, here's a test. Explain to us what polymorphonuclear neutrophils are.
I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, good. Come on with your question.
But at any rate, the reason I called was it just seems to me as if I've chosen something to do that's going to take lots and lots of education, lots and lots of my life, time away from my family, and all these things that are going to be sacrificed. And I'm choosing something that I thought I would be rewarded for. And it seems to me that I'm being penalized by the government today because I've chosen something that pays a lot of money, and it just seems that for some reason they've chosen doctors to single out at this point.
Yes, and I understand if I recall the statistics that doctors are earning roughly 12 or 13% rate of return on their investment. That is the amount of time and money you spend in school. and the foregone income, and then if you look at your pay for the rest of your life, you're earning roughly a 13% rate of return on investment, which is fairly good, but it's not ridiculous.
Well, no. But, I sit here and when I think, and, you're by yourself and you run through your mind, well, why don't they begin to think about regulating lawyers? I mean, they get 30% of estates. Well,
the lawyers do the regulating.
and that's the rub, right? That's the
That's
problem.
right. But I think that what a lot of people do, they're succumbing to the politics of envy. That is all you have to say, or all a politician has to say is, look, somebody's earning more money than you are. Can I get your vote to get him?
Well, what's your opinion? Do you think we're going to head in that direction further?
Well, I don't know, but I would hope not.
I would too. Because thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot, Scott.
Okay.
Let's go to Ron in Sierra Vista, Arizona.
Yes. The question about the polymorpho. I'm a nursing student.
A polymorphonuclear neutrophil.
Yeah, it's neutrophil is a neutrophil with lobes on its nucleus. Do I pass?
No, let me give you the answer. Polymorphonuclear neutrophils are the basic constituent of the phagocytic action of the leukocytes.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
Well, I just looked up polymorpho in my medical dictionary, and that's what it told me.
Oh, well, your medical dictionary is wrong.
Okay.
Okay, and
That's
what's your
not my
question?
point. I like I said, I'm a nursing student, and if it wasn't for the aid-dependent children and that, I couldn't be a nursing student and take care of my family. I'm a single parent also. And so I think that the welfare system can be used productively
Okay,
if one wants to use it. It's
Ron,
not all bad.
Ron, where do you think the money comes from for the welfare system?
Where do I think it comes from?
Yeah.
My neighbors.
Yes.
They're
Now,
paying taxes.
well, are they volunteering?
Are they
No.
volunteering? No, they're not volunteering.
Okay, so so the government's taking their money and giving it to you. What do you think about that? The morality of that?
I don't know how I would make it otherwise.
Well, no, you. Okay, so here we don't want to. This is what's wrong with our country a little bit, Ron, and I don't want to pick on you because
That's okay. I called to be picked up.
Okay, but too many of us are willing to say that well, look, I have this particular need, and I don't care where the government gets the money.
Okay.
I mean that is not quite right in a free society. And
I agree.
And see, the thing is, if it were just Ron doing that, that would be fine. But there are 200 and some million Americans trying to do the same thing. That is what we're becoming. We're becoming a nation of thieves.
Okay. But
and we all must say, let's stop. Now, I understand a whole lot of people. See, like me, for example. Several years ago, I was telling my mother, I was saying, well, Mom, look, I'm paying taxes, all these taxes. Why don't you get in the senior citizens energy energy assistance program, and this program, that program? And you know what Mom told me? Mom said, look, I haven't taken anything for anybody yet, and I'm not about to take. I'm not about to start. And she taught me a lesson. I just didn't, I didn't consider it that way. We have to become a more moral people. Now, when people have trouble, I don't have any problem with saying, well, look, I'll volunteer, I'll help you out, Ron, or something like that. That is good.
I looked for something to do that first.
Yeah.
But there was nobody volunteering.
Well,
so I turned around and said, okay, what's my other option?
What about a loan?
Well, I was looking at loans, but I was looking that I was putting my family in more debt than I could probably repay.
Well, if you go through school and do a good job, you can pay.
Well, I will be able to pay. I am doing a good job. I have a 3.7 average, grade point average.
Well, that is really great, Ron. But look, we have to become a more moral people. Each of us has to say we are not going to take from one another anymore. Thanks a lot for calling in, and we'll be back after these. Whatever happened to the idea that if you can't afford children, don't have them? See, let me give you a short biology lesson. Children are not an act of God. You have to take steps to have children. So if you cannot afford children, don't have them. I remember several years ago I was on a program with a bunch of people. They had Barney Frank, a congressman from Massachusetts, on, and he really got angry with me because a lady said that I don't have enough money for my children. She had about 4 or 5 children, no husband. And I asked her, have you ever thought about the proposition that you have too many children for your money? It can go that way. I mean, children are not an act of God. Okay, let me get off that one. Now, for all of you people out there who are worried about cigarettes on airplanes, and you're happy now that there's no smoking on airplanes, let me read you this from the New York Times on October 21st, 1993. Federal health officials said today that they had compelling evidence that a Continental Airlines flight attendant with active tuberculosis infected 23 crew members who worked with her last fall on several long international flights. Now, the problem is there's not enough circulation on the planes. And this is what the tobacco lobby has been saying all the time, that they ought to improve the circulation, and cigarette smoke would not be the kind of problem that it was. It would not be the annoyance to people that it was. Well, anyway, we got rid of cigarette smoke, and now we have these little bacteria going around that might kill you. Okay, let's take a call. And the next one up is Marlon from Sacramento, California. And I understand that there's a newspaper out there that at least used to carry my column. Welcome, Marlon.
Hello. It's an
Hi.
honor to speak to you.
Hi.
I read you in the Conservative Chronicle. I don't take Sacramento papers. I'm a college lecturer in California, and I wanted to talk to you about a couple of things. One thing that you've discussed already is the goal of increasing admission percentages for different minority students, and the problems that have happened with that in many unprepared students failing. And also, something you didn't mention is that many students who are very prepared are not admitted because their particular race or group has too many successful students.
That's absolutely right. Let me just give you a statistic because I'm very well aware of that. That is at Berkeley, at UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, in order to accommodate Hispanic and black students and other minorities, they turn away every year 2,000 straight A Asian and white students. That's a tragedy, I think, and I think that's disgusting.
And that's not mentioned very often, and I think that is a terrible thing.
And see, here's what they do. They will bring these students, and matter of fact, let me tell you a very interesting thing, that black students who go to Berkeley, their SAT scores, their average SAT score is 954, which is higher than the average nationally, but they're flunking out. Only 30-some% graduate within a 5-year period. So they are bringing black students to Berkeley to flunk out who would be successful at, say, San Jose State or Los Angeles State, and they're not admitting students, Asian and white students who are straight A, who would be successful. In other words, it's a no-win situation. That is, and still the white students are better off than the black students in that case because graduating from the college of your second choice is better than flunking out of the college of your first choice.
Right, and many of those students would be better off if they were admitted into a community college, improved their study skills, and then went on, transferred after 2 years to UC Berkeley or someplace like that if they were prepared.
That is right.
The thing I wanted to talk about is a new concept that they're talking about out here, which is educational equity. And educational equity means that we're admitting students at almost at proper percentages now, but we're failing them because they're not graduating. And now the goal is to graduate them at the same percentage as their percentage in the population, which you can see what's going to happen with that.
And one of the tragedies of that is that it discredits the degree held by black students who do well. it makes their degree worthless in the market. And this is happening for professors. There's an article by John Bunzell. He's at the Hoover Institution, and he cites a guy named Charles Willie. He's an education professor at Harvard University, and he says, excellence should not be the primary concern of universities because it excludes minorities. Instead, he says, the university should be concerned with adequacy. Now, that is an insult to black people.
So we need to strive for adequacy.
That's right. And further, let me just give you one more thing. He says that in hiring their faculty, universities should not choose the best, but should give precedence to minority candidates who fall within the range of adequacy. This is disgusting. This is not America that people are talking about. I mean, can you imagine the Los Angeles Lakers saying, well, look, we just want basketball players that are going to be adequate. Or would you go to a doctor who graduated under these terms? That is, he was adequate. It's tragic, and I don't know how long we're going to put up with this. One thing that can be done, taxpayers who support the schools in California and all these schools, Los Angeles State College and the State College system and the university system, taxpayers should rebel, and contributors, charitable foundations, they should cut the funds when they find out that this kind of thing is going on, because, as we said the day before yesterday, there's nothing that will open the closed minds of administrators than the sound of a pocketbook snapping shut. And that's what we must do. That is, if we're concerned about helping education, getting a better education system, then we have to cut off the funds to people who are engaging in this human destructive activity.
Have you heard of this idea of educational equity? Is it pretty widespread, or is this basically a California thing that's starting to?
Yes, I've heard of it. They don't call it equity in other places, but they call it retention programs, and they call it they want good graduation rates, and so it's going on all over this country. Thanks a lot, Marlon, for bringing this up. And after
You're listening to the EIB network on 77 WABC.
Walter Williams sitting in for Rush, and the number is 800-282-2882, and Rush will be back in the chair on Monday, so tune in. You know, as is common this time of the year, every year, predictions about winners, losers, events, and everything else under the sun for the next year are the rage. Now, on last night's edition of Nightline, guests Jerry Nachman, Mary Matlin, and Clarence Page were asked this question by the host, Sam Donaldson.
All right, real quick answer on this one. One word if you can. Does Rush Limbaugh continue to be the #1 hot personality by the end of '94? Jerry?
Absolutely. I'm going to go more than a word. I think being a hugely best-selling author, I think being the most successful radio broadcaster in history, and despairing like a lot of people despair about where the great Republican hope is coming from, he may start making some rumblings about a candidacy.
He's going to run for the presidency?
I think he might entertain the thought.
Well, that was a book. Mary, real quick, please.
Absolutely, that's a no-brainer. He will not entertain the thought, but there will be a grassroots draft Rush movement, which he will decline.
Clarence.
Well, I couldn't bear the thought of Rush Limbaugh gloating if I predicted his downfall, so I'm going to agree that, yes, he will survive as long as he's got a Clinton administration to beat up on.
That's what they said. That's what they said before. That is, when the Republicans are out, Rush is out. But Rush is here to stay. God bless him. And how about an update from our EIB archives with our friend? Let's have the update with the friend that we have with the ears.
Remember when on Larry King I said I'd handle everything 'cause I knew how to make this country work? Well, You followed me for a little while and then found out what makes me smile, and now you know I got this little quirk. See, they're coming to take me away, ha-ha. They're coming to take me away, ho-ho, hee-hee, ha-ha, to the funny farm where life is beautiful all the time, and I'll be happy to see them volunteers and them starch brown shirts, and they're coming to take me away, ha-ha. You thought I was a joke, and so you laughed when I had said that I'm all ears and there's nothing in it for me. Right? You know you laughed. I heard you laugh. You laughed, and then you left me because you knew I was utterly mad. Ha! Well, you'll believe the conspiracy when they have had to bury me after the Cubans take me out like they did JFK. See? They're coming to take me away, ha-ha. They're coming to take me away, ho-ho, hee-hee, ha-ha, to the funny farm where life is beautiful all the time, and I'll be there with the volunteers and the Star Brown Church, and they're coming to take me away, ha-ha. It's a happy home, and they'll have a jacket of American made.
Your screen there, what I was going to ask, but the other day I was listening to you, and you were talking about how about the majorities. And how most white people are not really in the majority.
That's right. That is, we're a nation of minorities.
Yeah, I'm Polish, and I'm just kind of wondering how I can get in on some of them bennies you were talking about. I was thinking, because every time I was watching, just the other day on one of these talk shows on TV, this lady was on there, and she says they were talking about how she was in a black college, and she was a black woman, and she was talking about how everything goes back to slavery, and I'm thinking, well, wait a second. It seems to me my ancestors were slaves about that same time, too.
That's right. Now, first, let me tell you people out there that according to the rules by the Bureau of Census, when they ask for race, it is self-designation. You are what you say you are. Moreover, there's a case a couple years ago about two brothers in, I believe it was Boston. They got into the fire department by saying, they became firemen by saying that they were white. I'm sorry, that they were black, but they were white. Oh. And they offered as evidence a picture of their grandmother who had sepia tones. She had a little bit of a hue with her a little bit. And then also, it's a very interesting case. It turned out to be a lawsuit or something out in San Francisco where I believe it was a guy, he's alleged to, well, they said he was an Italian, but he got in under the Mexican-American quotas. So just go up and say, well, you might not be able to get away with saying that you're black, because people can see. Matter of fact, speaking of can see, you always hear the statement that white men can't jump. And I was looking at Ted Danson and Whoopi Goldberg, and I said, damn, they can't see either. And so, but I think that we should, you're really joking with me, aren't you?
Yeah, I was.
Okay.
I got thinking about it, though, and I keep thinking, with being Polish, my ancestors were slaves then, too.
Yeah.
So shouldn't I get some benefits because of that?
And then also, people are always making jokes about your ancestors.
You better believe it. I mean, there's more Polish
and some
than anything else.
And some of the jokes are pretty good.
Yeah, I must admit they are.
Matter of fact, I think ethnic jokes are good. That is, if they don't get carried too far. But we become super sensitive as a nation.
I think it was way too super sensitive.
That's right. You can't use terms like Dutch treat or you Welshed on me and things like that.
Yep.
Thanks a lot for calling in, Ted. And after these important words, we'll be back. We're back again, and I want all of you to stay tuned after the big break, because we're going to have David Bose, Vice President of the Cato Institute, to talk about drugs. But back to the phone lines. Rich from Fairfax, Virginia, where I work. You're up.
Correct, sir. It's a pleasure to talk with you. I didn't know there were any blacks that felt the way you did out there. It's a pleasure to know that there are.
There's an increasing number.
Well, I'm delighted with that. I really think you ought to have your own show. I think it would be a tremendous success. I think you're very good.
Well, thank you. Thanks a lot.
I'd like to have your comments, sir, on what I call the hypocrisy of many blacks who insist on integrating our public schools, then almost in the same breath solicit everyone to contribute to the black college of your choice.
That does seem to be working at cross purposes. I think, one of the tragic things that's happening in America, that is racism and discrimination and race-based type things could have died a natural, well-deserved death. But however, there are many in this country who benefit from resuscitating racism by keeping it alive and keeping our focus on race. And when we should focus on being an American, being Americans, we have a hell of a lot of problems in this country, and we need not get distracted by issues of race. That is, they ought to be put to bed once and for all.
I totally agree.
And so I agree. That is, if anybody finds it offensive to say, well, look, let's raise money for white colleges, well, they should also find it offensive to raise money for black colleges. Sure. I mean, see, what we should do, we should treat our problems as human problems. Yeah. That is, and these big problems that we face as a nation, they are basically human problems. That is, I don't care if you're whiter than white. If you do not do your studying and if you go to rotten schools, you have a problem. It's a human problem. If you are born and you find out that your mother is 14 years old, you don't know who or where your father is, and your grandmother is 30, that's a basic problem. I don't care what color you are. And so I think I would love to see our become more focused on human problems. That is, to treat these as human problems than to think of them as exclusively racial problems.
I think the message that you're sending to the student, the poor student, he's integrated all these years in high school and all the way through, now he's got to go off, trucking off to an all-black school. And I don't understand what, I don't know what the message he gets from that sort of thing, or she would get from something like that, but it would seem sort of incongruous with what they've been taught all those years.
That's right, and I can't agree with you more, Rich.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for calling in.
Thank you for taking your time.
WABC New York.
WABC, Arbitron rated #1 AM radio station in New York City. And now, Black by Popular Demand. Dr. Walter Williams sitting in for Rush Limbaugh on the EIB network.
Yes, it's me sitting in for the man. He'll be back in a chair Monday. I'm sitting in for him on the last time. It will be 107 in 1993. In a few hours, we're going to be into the new year. Well, on the line with me right now, I have David Bose, and he is the vice president of the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. He has written numerous articles that you might have seen in your local newspaper and other publications. He's edited a book that's going to be our subject, or the subject matter will be that of this hour, Crisis in Drug Prohibition. And he did a collection of essays called Market Liberalism. He's also made fine contributions to the idea of school choice. And welcome, David.
Thank you, Walter.
First, tell the listeners what the Cato Institute does, just very briefly.
Well, we're a public policy research organization, sometimes called a think tank, and we publish lots of books and studies on a whole lot of public issues, including defense spending, foreign policy, the environment, taxes, and spending. Most of our work is focused on the idea of lower taxes and limited government, and we do analyses of the way the government screws up all sorts of things.
Yes, including things like the post office, health care.
Absolutely.
And matter of fact, I had Dr. John Goodman on yesterday, and he was talking about health care and the publication. What's the name of it? That
he co-authored a book for us called Patient Power.
Yeah, Patient Power.
About, giving people the power to control medical care costs rather than government bureaucracy.
That's right. But here today, We're going to talk about a somewhat controversial subject, and particularly in light of Jocelyn Elders, the Surgeon General's recent comments having to do with drug prohibition, and maybe we need to look at it a different way. First, before we actually get into the topic of policy-type issues, could you tell us when? It's my understanding that drugs have not always been, that is, drugs that are now illegal have not always been illegal in the United States.
That's right. Different drugs have been illegal at different times, but basically during the 19th century, there were no restrictions, certainly none at the federal level, on any of the mind-altering drugs, whether we're talking about alcohol or marijuana or opium, which we now use in the form of heroin. All of those things were legal in the 19th century up until 1914, and that's when we had the Harrison Narcotics Act. That was the progressive era, when there started being all sorts of federal legislation telling us all kinds of things that we had to do or couldn't do. Drug prohibition, in a sense, was part of that effort.
And it was part of the, I guess it was the precursor to the Volstead Act.
That's right. That was only a few years later. Fortunately, that one didn't last as long. They tried outlawing alcohol, and that was such an immediate disaster that it only took about 14 years. And as you know, for government to realize its mistake in 14 years is almost a record.
That's a split second.
Yeah, that's right.
But there's another question that comes up is, and that is, why were Milton Friedman? Let me go back. Milton Friedman offers one hypothesis for the Volstead Act. He said that the soldiers were away fighting World War I, and many of these activists or progressives just had a field day during that time.
Well, that might very well be true. Obviously, alcohol can cause a lot of problems. A lot of people can mess themselves up pretty badly, and there were people who saw that. And as you know, a lot of people, when they see a problem, they think, well, we should just have a law to outlaw it. If too many people are using guns, let's just say, well, guns will be illegal, and then nobody will be shot after that.
That's right. Well, they're illegal in Washington.
That's right, and that's why nobody gets shot here. But obviously that misses the point that there are a lot of guns out there because people want guns, and they're not going to turn them in because the government tells them to. Mm-hmm. And similarly, when they tried to outlaw alcohol, it turned out they got a lot of problems they didn't expect. Plus, they didn't get people to stop drinking alcohol.
And matter of fact, I believe Milton Friedman says that that alcohol consumption went up.
Well, it's difficult to tell. People are not very good at giving honest answers about whether they're doing something illegal. Most scholars, I think, would say that alcohol consumption probably went down, but not by that much, and it went down initially and then rose steadily during Prohibition. Plus, and this is something we're also seeing with drug prohibition, it's easiest to crack down on the biggest, bulkiest, least expensive form of the drug, which in that case was beer. So beer consumption probably went down while consumption of hard liquor did not. So you had people shifting from beer to harder forms of alcohol.
I see. Now, let me ask you the question. I know many of our listeners are interested in this, and by the way, you can call in. The number is 800-282-2882, and you can talk to David Bose. Now, the question I have for you, and I think our listeners will be very interested in this one as well, and that is, how likely is it that the nation can solve our drug problems using the tactics that we currently employ?
Well, we've been trying drug prohibition, of course, for about 75 years. Starting in 1981, when President Reagan took office, we really stepped it up. And every 2 years throughout the Reagan and Bush years, we passed stricter laws at the federal level. We've been sending more people to jail. We're arresting more than 1 million people a year. We're spending somewhere like $13 to $15 billion a year at the federal level on the drug war. And I don't think anybody out there would say it's a success. So what is the likelihood that we're going to solve it if we arrested 2 million people a year and spent $20 billion? We've stepped everything up in the past dozen years, and what we've mostly gotten out of it is a higher crime rate.
Yeah, well, some people will say, well, look, David, China had a drug problem, and it's solved now.
You always assume that there must be some level of totalitarianism that would surely make people stop doing things. I mean, if we said that policemen could execute you on the spot for drinking beer, surely that would cut down on beer drinking.
And indeed, from what I understand, in China, that was effectively done, wasn't it?
Well, that's right. There wasn't a whole lot of civil liberties or due process concerns in China. But in a society that maintains some level of civil liberties, I just think it's going to be impossible to do that sort of thing. We have stepped up punishment a lot. We've imposed mandatory sentences. We're letting murderers out of jail so that drug dealers can fill the prison cells, and yet we don't seem to be stopping people from using drugs. Now, it may well be, again, it's hard to tell because people don't necessarily answer surveys honestly. It may well be that drug use is declining. It appears that it started declining in 1978 when, of course, there was no stepped-up drug war. In fact, most of the drug warriors will tell you that there was a terrible problem in the Carter years with the government being kind of indifferent to the drug problem. And yet 1978 is the year that most people would say drug use peaked. So it's been declining since then, but it's important to remember that legal drug use has been declining as well. So that suggests to me it isn't the drug war, it is a general feeling of more interest in health and fitness and safety in the United States that's causing people to move away from alcohol and tobacco and illegal drugs. But the use by hardcore users and the huge profits in the business have not changed, and therefore you're getting these huge levels of crime. We're setting murder rates in the United States right now, not just in Washington and New York, but in St. Paul and Fresno and Richmond and places like that that you don't think of as high crime areas.
Yes. Okay. Well, what is the solution? What are some of the solutions that you would propose?
Well, I think the solution we have to look at is the same one we looked at in 1933 because of the high crime rates of alcohol. We have to take the huge profits out of the drug business. As long as we have these huge profits, I mean, a guy like Pablo Escobar can become worth $4 billion from selling drugs. That's crazy. Nobody should be able to make that kind of money. And the reason they can make it is it's an illegal black market, which is because it's illegal. If we decriminalize drugs, or if we re-legalize them, some of my friends like to call it, go back to the 19th century policy of saying it's going to be legal in the United States for adults to use and sell all drugs, alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, and so on, then I think you would take the huge profits out, you would get rid of the black market, you would tremendously reduce the crime rates in American cities. I might even be able to walk home from the metro in Washington.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, let's stop right now, and we'll when we come back from the break, there'll be a couple people that want to ask you some questions, and then I also have a question regarding an article I'm reading. It's called "Prohibition Was and Is Bad for the Nation's Health," and it was written by Dr. John P. Morgan. Mm-hmm. And he makes some interesting observations that I think we perhaps can discuss. One final question from me before we get to the calls. Now, Dr. John P. Morgan, he says that the prohibition generates more let me start again. Prohibition generates more potent forms of the forbidden substance.
Yeah, I think that's right. We call it the iron law of prohibition, that the tougher the enforcement, the harder the drugs will get. We saw that back in alcohol prohibition when it was easiest to crack down on beer. We're seeing it now because what's the biggest, bulkiest, cheapest illegal drug? It's marijuana. And college students tell me that it actually has gotten harder and more expensive to find marijuana on college campuses, which is a great triumph for the drug war because now college kids are using cocaine instead of marijuana like they did when I was in college. So it seems to me that that is a particularly bad effect. Crack, I think, is almost entirely a product of prohibition. You give dealers an incentive to try to get the most bang for the buck. What's the most concentrated way to make money in the drug business? Come up with something like crack and sell that. We probably wouldn't have even had crack if we hadn't had drug prohibition the past 10 years.
Oh, I see. And that seems to, your observation seems to concur with Dr. Morgan. Let's take a few calls. First up, Stan, welcome to EIB. Stan's from Castro Valley. Is Castro or Castro?
Castro, as in cigars.
That's where they make all the artichokes, isn't it?
No, it's pretty close.
Oh, that's Castro. Okay,
yeah.
Fine. Okay.
Doctor, it's an honor. Thank you for what you're doing. I just wanted to make a couple of points that if out of one side of our mouth we're saying that drugs are destroying this country, it seems to me it's a very blatant form of treason and should be punishable by death. Number two, as a recovering addict, I know a lot of people who can drink alcohol 3, 4, 5 times a week and not require it. I dare say I've never met an addict who could use heroin once, twice, 3, 4 times a week and not become severely addicted and require more with each use.
So your question to David Bowes is what?
How do you justify legalizing something like heroin?
Well, I think the point is, nobody is arguing that drugs are good for you. I don't think tobacco is good for you. I don't think alcohol is good for you. I don't think Karl Marx's books are good for you. But the problem is that when you try to outlaw something that people want, you end up getting all these side effects. There's no question that drugs can do bad things to people, but drug prohibition does bad things to innocent people who haven't even tried to get involved with drugs. It makes it difficult for our families to walk through the streets of our cities because of the addicts trying to commit crimes to pay for these habits that would be much more affordable if they were legal. Now, in your sentence, you said something that maybe you didn't mean to say. You said, I don't know of an addict who can use drugs once or twice a week. Well, of course not. That's what being addicted means. But we certainly know people who use marijuana and cocaine on Saturday nights, but not any other time, the way some people use whiskey on Saturday night. If you're an addict or an alcoholic, then of course you don't use it once in a while. But if you're simply a user, remember there are 23 million drug users in the United States. There certainly aren't 23 million addicts.
Thank you very much, Stan. Let's go to Sam in Baton Rouge.
Hello.
You're on with David Bowes, Vice President of the Cato Institute.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. David, I have a question. Do you look on drug use as deviant behavior?
Well, I don't know what deviant means. I look on listening to the Rush Limbaugh show as deviant behavior because most people don't do it. So in that sense, it's abnormal. But I don't believe that there is a moral distinction between using marijuana and using alcohol. They're both mind-altering drugs.
Hold a minute, Sam. What he means by saying that Rush Limbaugh's program is listening to that as deviant behavior, he means that is not normal. Most people don't listen to Rush Limbaugh, but we are going to make that not true.
Well,
everybody's going to listen to him after a while. But continue, Sam.
Well, with I know that someone can drink a beer and not achieve any level of intoxication, whereas that the focus of drug use is intoxication. I mean, I have used marijuana, and I've used quite a few drugs, and I know what their effects are, and I know why people use them, and I want to know when a society has sanctioned or legalized deviant behavior, has social order been maintained or increased? If you would give me a specific historical example.
Okay, the 19th century in the United States, when all these drugs were legal.
It was not addressed. In other words, the behavior was not addressed.
It was legal.
The behavior, when the behavior was addressed, then it was saying, look, this is causing social deterioration, so we need to address the behavior.
No, the point is, I'm not saying the government should put out a resolution saying everyone should use drugs. I'm saying they should repeal the laws and let free people make up their own minds about how to live their lives.
Consequently sanctioning the behavior.
Well, that's what we did in the 19th century. We didn't have any laws.
Well, wouldn't this just, you've got a distribution system through the underworld right now, so what you're going to do is say that this distribution system is now a legitimate business, as when pornography was legalized. Well, pornography use go down when pornography was legalized.
I believe, Sam, that Dave was saying that the distribution system would go away if it is legalized, just like the mafia and all the other gangs engaging in alcohol distribution also went away when the end to prohibition.
But the underworld distributes pornography now. I mean, it just legitimizes. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
They legitimate the distribution system. Well, did legalizing abortion decrease the number of abortions?
I don't have the numbers on that.
No, it certainly didn't decrease it.
It increased the number of abortions. You're going to increase. England legalized heroin and heroin use, and the addiction rate went up fourfold.
Well, neither of those sentences is true. England never legalized heroin. It made heroin available to registered addicts through medical centers.
That's what Bob Dornan said last week on the radio, on the Rush Limbaugh show.
Well, he was wrong. That happened.
The abortion rate has certainly skyrocketed through legalization.
The abortion rate has gone up. I think abortion is a very different kind of issue. Clearly, abortion involves another life. Whether or not you think it's a life that should be legally protected, there's another life there. If a person chooses to use a drug, no other life is affected.
How about their family? How about their family? Their families are affected when people use drugs.
Yes.
Families are destroyed through drug use.
Well, let him respond, Sam.
Okay. Families are affected by all sorts of things that people do. If they choose not to take a better job, if they choose to act in such a way on the job that they get fired, if they use alcohol, families are affected. And again, I am not defending drug use or alcohol use. I'm saying the consequences of prohibition mean that you have all the consequences of drug use, plus you have our streets are unsafe, our police are corrupt. Have you been reading about the New York City police corruption trials?
I think it's
astounding. And it's all a result of the drug laws.
Thanks a lot, Sam. And Dave, can you stay with us over the break? We'll be back talking to the vice president of the Cato Institute after this.
For the gentleman from the Cato Institute who...
David. David
sir,
Burris.
you seem to be wanting to re-legitimize drugs in terms of laws. Because in the 19th century, we didn't have laws against drug use. Well, my contention is we didn't need them because back in the 19th century, people knew the difference between right and wrong, and there was a family unit there in the 19th century that isn't here anymore that provided the education to keep people off the drugs. And that's my contention. Any comments?
Well, obviously there are differences between the 19th century and now. The issue is, would drug use skyrocket if drugs were legal? My response would be drug use skyrocketed while drugs were illegal. So I don't think that you're going to see a huge increase. But the argument for doing this is not, oh, it worked in the 19th century. The argument is half the crime in our major cities and more than half the murders are a result of the black market in drugs. If we want to reduce crime in the United States, the most important thing we can do is decriminalize the use and sale of drugs and let the police focus on violent crime.
How would you propose the drugs be sold then?
I would say that the best solution we've come up with for selling illegal drugs, or for selling dangerous drugs, is the one we use for alcohol, which is to say that the drugs should be available through the free enterprise system to adults. They should not be sold to children. The stores are licensed. The alcohol is even sort of produced under federal inspection, so if that makes people feel more comfortable, that makes a difference. But basically, it should be available to adults at the market price.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Jim.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Let's move on to Nancy from Missouri.
Hi to both of you.
Hi, Nancy.
I just wanted to make the point that I think that you're going at this, that the drug problem is a supply-side problem, and I don't believe it is. I think it's demand-oriented. And I think that if you legalize drugs, the demand is still going to be there. And yes, you may save some lives in the crimes that are committed because of the black market, but I think that in other areas, the quality of life is going to go way down, and that more people are going to use it.
I'm going to let David respond to you, but let me say this to everybody out there, and that is, we have a serious problem in our country. And I believe that David and many people I've heard who present the argument for decriminalization of drugs, they're going to say that they care just as much as anybody else does about what drugs are doing to our country. They care. They do not like to see it any more than anybody else out there. But they're saying, look, we're doing it a certain way, and it's not working. So we ought to be able to think about some other things. Now, I'm not committed one way or the other. I think that there's some serious problems, because I've asked some of the people in Washington. I said, well, you know, mankind has been trying to eliminate drugs, prostitution, and gambling since before Christ. And are we now saying that the Bush administration is going to succeed in what mankind has failed to achieve from time immemorial? So it's a difficult problem, and I think that we need inputs. And I think Nancy is right on the target here, pointing out that there is some demand side problem. So what Nancy, I believe you're saying, if I can just paraphrase a little bit, Nancy, is that it's a kind of a health problem in the sense that we need to treat people so that they will not buy drugs, and if they don't buy drugs, you will not see drug sellers.
Basically that's it. I think that you have to go to the root of the problem. But I do think that it would be compounded by legalizing it. And also I want to make one more comment, and that was that if he doesn't think that this directly affects anyone but the user, and I'm not just talking about family members that live with the people, he needs to go visit some wards in the hospital where they have crack babies. And, mothers that are carrying children. That is affecting directly another life.
Yes. Well, thanks a lot, Nancy. You want to respond, David?
Well, I think that it's important to say that, of course, we want honest drug education. We want people to know the consequences of using all kinds of drugs. That's what has tremendously reduced the use of tobacco in the United States. Not prohibition, but telling people what the effects of tobacco use are. We need stronger families, and we need to discuss, and I'm sure you've done other shows where you talk about the way government is weakening families. We need to talk about the need for stronger families and a better commitment to distinguishing between right and wrong. But given all of those things, the question, there's always going to be some people who want to use mind-altering drugs. Given that fact, what's the best way to deal with it? Is the best way to make them go underground and use drugs illegally and pay huge amounts of money for it, or to be able to get what they want and to try to discourage people from wanting it?
Yeah, and I believe my colleague Tom Soul, he's also asked the question. He says that drug people who want to get drugs, through history, it has shown that they can get them. They're going to get them somewhere or the other. And does it make much sense in trying to prevent a person from harming himself to cause him to have to cause harm to